Imagine waking up in a world where every step you take is watched, every smile analyzed, every gesture compared. A world where you don't live just for yourself, but for an invisible audience that demands you always be okay, always interesting, always right. This world exists. It rests in the palms of our hands, in the screens that light up our faces each morning. It is the digital stage, where we are all both spectators and protagonists in a play that never ends. And the most unsettling part, few realize they are acting before social media existed. The self was a more private construction, shaped by close relationships, by shared silences, by memories that didn't need to be photographed. Today, that construction is public, molded by continuous exposure, by the performance of who we want to appear to be. The digital persona doesn't begin with the first profile, it builds slowly, with each carefully chosen post, each retouched selfie, each silence in the face of what we choose not to show. It feeds on the need to be seen, understood, and validated. There's something deeply human about this search for belonging. Since the earliest times, we've longed for acceptance, within the group, for recognition, for value. But in the digital realm, this ancestral need meets a distorted showcase, where the reflection is always partial and almost always idealized. We don't post who we are. We post who we wish others to believe we are. Every click on publish is, in truth, a silent plea. See me, accept me, admire me. But how often does this digital acceptance reflect who we truly are? The digital ego is born in this abyss between being and appearing. It's seductive, captivating, irresistible. It offers us the power to edit reality, to choose angles, words, moments. It lets us escape from flaws, insecurities, and the shadowy zones of the soul. But as this ego grows, something quiet unfolds. We begin to believe we are it. We start identifying with this curated, polished, strategically built version. And in doing so, we slowly drift away from the parts of ourselves that don't fit the feed, the vulnerability, the fear, the confusion, the silence. This digital persona doesn't appear out of nowhere. It has deep roots in our fear of rejection, in the emptiness we carry, in our insecurity in a world where everything feels fleeting. Instead of confronting those shadows, we build a mask that feels like protection. But every mask is a disguised prison. The more it protects us, the more it separates us from others, and from ourselves. It's a subtle separation, almost imperceptible at first, but over time it becomes a chasm that's hard to cross. How many times have you smiled for a camera while feeling broken inside? How often have you posted something just to maintain the appearance of success, of happiness, of stability? How many times have you silenced your pain so your profile wouldn't feel too heavy? This constant curation of our own existence becomes a habit, a second nature. And the most tragic part is that, in the process, we begin to doubt our own authenticity. What's still genuine? What's performance? Where does the character end and the human begin? The digital space, which could be a place of real connection, becomes a showroom of egos and competition. And this competition is rarely conscious. It manifests in constant comparisons, in anxiety after a post doesn't perform well, in the need to always appear updated, relevant, admirable. Every like is a microdose of validation. Each click a momentary relief from the fear of not being enough. But that validation is volatile, fleeting, and what it nourishes isn't the soul, it's the persona, the digital ego that demands to be fed at any cost. As we nourish this persona, we stop listening to essential parts of ourselves. We unlearn how to be silent, how to embrace boredom, how to accept imperfection. Real life, with its highs and lows, its rawness, its truth, becomes unbearable compared to the edited glow of the online world. We lose patience with the slowness of inner processes because we've grown addicted to the instant gratification of the screen. And so, without realizing it, we drift away from our own humanity. This distance comes at a price, a high one, because the more we identify with this digital persona, the more dependent we become on it to feel that we exist. And when that persona is threatened by criticism, by lack of engagement, by moments of invisibility, it feels like something inside us is being destroyed. It's not just the character that's at stake, it's the identity we've built upon it. And what remains, when that identity begins to crumble? There is something hypnotic about the way we scroll, sliding from face to face, from life to life, as if we were drifting through a catalog of perfect existences. We're not just looking at photos, we're absorbing symbols. Each image carries a silent message. Look how happy I am, look how free I am, look how desirable I am. The most disturbing part is that it's not an outright lie, it's a distorted truth, polished and varnished until all its roughness is gone. A life that looks real but is only appearance, a shine that dissolves like mist when touched at some point along the human journey. Being was replaced by appearing. Image became more important than experience, aesthetics more seductive than essence. We no longer live just to feel, we live to document. A dinner, a trip, a smile, everything must be captured, validated, displayed, as if memory were no longer enough, as if what isn't seen by others has no value. The lens comes between us and the present moment, and what could be lived with intensity is reduced to material for display. we are slowly becoming the directors of our own everyday fiction. This obsession with image isn't born from vanity, but from longing, a deep, almost primal need to be noticed. The problem is that in the digital world, being noticed is not the same as being truly seen. We are noticed for the surface, the face, the body, the backdrop, but rarely for what we feel, what hurts us, what moves us in silence. The soul doesn't go viral. A sincere tear, an existential void, a moment of inner stillness. None of this fits well within the algorithms, so we learn, often unconsciously, to hide what is real and display what is convenient. When we look in the mirror, we no longer see just our reflection. We see the implicit comparison with the faces we scroll past online. We see imperfections that never used to matter, now transformed into flaws. We see wrinkles, dark circles, bodies that don't match the mold. Self-image becomes a silent battlefield, where the enemy is an unattainable ideal. And in this war we lose something precious: acceptance of what is ours, of what is real, of what makes us human precisely because it is imperfect. The cult of image also shapes the way we relate to others. We start to see people as extensions of their posts. We form expectations based on fragments of lives we don't truly know. We fall in love with profiles, not people. We admire projections, not presences. And when reality shows up more raw, more ambiguous, more unstable, we feel disappointment, frustration, distance, because the real demands more than a swipe, demands listening, presence, vulnerability, things the screen, no matter how interactive, can never fully offer. The logic of constant comparison may be one of the most destructive forces of the digital age. We don't just compare our bodies or faces, we compare our paths, our timing, our achievements, and we forget that every life has its own rhythm, its own pain, its own context that can't be captured in images. Comparison traps us in a race with no finish line, because there will always be someone with more followers, more trips, more praise, more applause. And in this game, the feeling of inadequacy never ends. It only hides beneath new filters. Many try to respond to this anxiety with more performance. They aim to appear more authentic, more natural, more real. But even naturalness has become an aesthetic. There's a correct way to seem spontaneous, a kind of imperfection that's acceptable, the kind that still brings engagement. We laugh at our flaws, but only so far as they don't expose us too much. We show the chaos of life, but with a carefully edited soundtrack. Vulnerability becomes content. Confession becomes strategy. And what could have been a sincere opening dissolves into the logic of calculated exposure. The question that echoes muffled beneath the noise of the timeline is, what remains when no one is watching? Who are we in the silence, when the phone is far away, when there are no likes, no comments, no external validations? It is in this hidden space, the space between being and showing, that we often find a disquieting echo, a discomfort that reveals how much we've lost ourselves while trying to be someone for others. The inner mirror, unlike the front-facing camera, does not filter. It shows what's truly there. And sometimes, what we see is a loneliness we didn't know how to name. The emptiness behind the eyes is not a lack of beauty, it's a lack of presence. It's the exhaustion of maintaining an image that demands constant energy, that never sleeps, that must never fall apart. And in this effort to sustain the shine, we begin to fade inside. It's like smiling for an audience while the soul whispers in desperation, "Please hear me." But on the digital stage, listening to yourself can feel like a luxury. And so we continue, gliding over the surface of our own existence, as if there were no depth left to explore. In a world where we can be anything, the silent and unsettling question arises: who are we, really? The promise of the digital age is seductive. We can build an image, shape a narrative, choose the angles, edit what we show. But the freedom to be everything, when driven by the desire for approval, quickly turns into a prison, not because someone forces us into it, but because deep down we no longer know how to live without the need to appear. By creating versions of ourselves to display online, we end up distancing ourselves from the parts that don't fit that mold. What isn't beautiful, isn't interesting, isn't marketable, gets pushed aside. And little by little, we begin to forget those parts. Identity fragments into multiple selves, each activated depending on the context. The professional self on LinkedIn, the funny self on TikTok, the aesthetic self on Instagram, the critical self on Twitter, each with its script, its tone, its strategy. And amidst so many roles, the inner silence becomes deafening. It's a cruel paradox. The more we try to define ourselves, the emptier we feel. Because none of these versions, no matter how well constructed, can hold the entirety of who we are. The soul doesn't fit in a profile. The complexity of human experience can't be reduced to a bio, a photo carousel, a follow account. But the system demands simplification. It rewards what is easy, digestible, aligned with expectations, and what is complex, contradictory, ambiguous. In other words, what is truly human becomes invisible. Over time, this disconnection seeps into everything. It affects our relationships, our mental health, our self-worth. We begin to measure our value by someone else's standards. We wake and sleep beside notifications, hoping that something, a like, A message, a comment, will remind us that we still exist, that we're still relevant. But that relevance is fragile. It depends on the mood of the algorithm, the attention of the audience, the timing of the post. And when it fails, when the response doesn't come, it feels like something inside us has disappeared. Within this landscape, the search for authenticity becomes an internal war. We want to be ourselves, but we no longer know what that means. The genuine I has been buried beneath edited versions, layers of adaptation, years of performance, and even when we try to access it, we feel fear. Fear that what lies underneath won't be enough. Fear that the truth is less interesting than the fiction. Fear of not being loved for who we really are, but only for the character we created. The crisis of the authentic self doesn't arrive abruptly. It settles in slowly, like a fog that envelops everything until we no longer know which direction to walk in. We start to distrust our own emotions. Am I truly happy, or just trying to look happy? Do I really like this, or am I just mimicking what works for others? Was this decision mine, or was it influenced by someone I want to impress? Authenticity, once something natural, becomes a complex task full of inner filters and hesitation. The cruelest part of this fragmentation is that it often happens without us noticing, where I continue living, working, relating, but inside there's a sense of absence, a subtle, constant emotional exhaustion. It's as if we're always performing, even in moments of rest, as if the stage lights never go out, as if we're always ready for the next entrance, even without knowing what role we're playing. This exhaustion isn't physical, it's existential. It's the fatigue of carrying versions of yourself that don't speak to one another, the weariness of maintaining masks that, though beautiful, are heavy. And when we try to take them off, we feel exposed, vulnerable, lost, because we've forgotten how to inhabit our own skin without fear, without performance, without needing applause. We've forgotten how to simply be with ourselves and recognize who we are, not as a successful, admired, charismatic persona, but as someone real, with doubts, flaws, scars, and silences. The digital world could have been a space for expression and freedom, but when it becomes a stage for ego, for the insatiable thirst for validation, for the worship of image, it turns into a broken mirror. And anyone who tries to see themselves there finds only fragments, disconnected parts of a whole we no longer know how to name. And then comes the simplest and most terrifying act: to stop producing, showing, pleasing, to pause and listen to yourself without the noise of others, and in that silence perhaps rediscover the question we forgot to ask: who am I when I'm not trying to be anyone? There is a silent paradox hovering over the digital age. We've never been so connected and at the same time so emotionally distant from one another. Social media, which promised to bring us closer, gave us bridges but rarely taught us how to cross them with real presence. We've grown used to the constant presence of names, faces, messages, notifications, but we've forgotten what it truly feels like to sense someone, to listen to someone, to touch someone, not with our fingers, but with our whole gaze, not through a keyboard, but with an attentive heart. Digital interaction has brought us closer to many, and ironically, further away from ourselves. Instead of shared silence, we exchange quick messages, generic emojis, ready-made phrases. Depth gave way to efficiency. Response time became more important than the quality of listening. There's no need to wait anymore, no need to dive deep. Speed defeated presence, and with that, our bonds became fragile as the glass screen that separates us. We've become so accustomed to being seen in fragments, a story, a tweet, a caption, that we've started to believe we must also feel in fragments. Hurt quickly, heal quickly, react quickly. But true emotion operates on a different timeline. It doesn't adapt to the logic of the feed. It doesn't fit into 15-second videos. Pain, loss, longing, love, regret, all of it needs silence, digestion, presence, and when we try to rush these processes in the name of emotional productivity, we become incapable of feeling fully. It's common to see public outbursts, emotional declarations, live cries, all shared instantly, as if the experience isn't valid without witnesses. But are we really expressing our feelings, or just responding to the need to be seen as sensitive, vulnerable, deep? Pain turned into content may spark momentary empathy, but it also risks becoming spectacle. And when suffering becomes performance, something within the soul quietly breaks. Somewhere along the way, we began to confuse connection with contact. We believe a good morning message is the same as care, that a kind comment replaces deep listening, that being online equals being emotionally present. But true connection requires risk. It requires real exposure, not just the exposure of an image. It requires the courage to stand fully before another person, unfiltered, unscripted, uncontrolled. And today, that seems more terrifying than posting the most intimate photo of our lives. In this new configuration of relationships, solitude has become unbearable. Silence is now felt as abandonment. And being alone, even for a few minutes, is quickly filled with stimuli, videos, messages, likes, notifications. The constant presence of distraction prevents us from diving into the discomfort that could reveal us. Because, at its core, loneliness doesn't hurt because of the absence of others, but because of the absence of ourselves. And if we no longer know how to be alone, perhaps it's because we've become strangers to who we are when no one is watching. This emotional disconnection doesn't only affect our interpersonal relationships, it changes how we relate to time, to the body, to nature. We live in fast forward, our minds always reaching for the next post, the next feedback, the next wave of validation. We no longer know how to wait, contemplate, or slow down. The now has lost its value in the face of the constant promise of something more stimulating just a click away. And at this pace, real life with its subtle details, long silences, and pauses becomes almost unbearable. How many times have you been somewhere beautiful, yet your attention was on the camera? How many important conversations have been interrupted by a notification? How many emotions have you suppressed because you needed to look okay online? Life moves on, but the performance continues. And little by little, we stop inhabiting the present moment. We become spectators of our own existence, viewing it through a lens, always waiting for the best angle, the best light, the best moment to show. But to show is not to live. In times of hyperconnection, true intimacy has become revolutionary. To be with someone, to listen with genuine interest, to make space for the complexity of emotion, all of that feels subversive because it requires presence. And presence, today, is rare. It's easier to send an emoji than to hold the gaze of someone who's breaking down. It's more comfortable to react than to dive deep. But it's in that dive where healing resides. Not in the likes, not in the shares, but in the silent vulnerability of standing whole before life, without turning it into content. Closing parenthesis. The final question, still echoing without an answer, is what truly connects us? What remains when the screens go dark, when the profiles go silent, when the camera is no longer recording? What's left when there's no audience, no performance, no script? The answer, perhaps, doesn't lie in more connections, but in fewer masks, fewer filters, less urgency. Because in the end, it's not the number of interactions that fills us, it's their depth. And that depth begins where the illusion of ego ends. After everything, perhaps only silence remains. The kind that arrives when the screen goes dark, when the feed ends, when there are no more updates to scroll. The silence that returns us to ourselves, not as avatars or personas, but as beings made of flesh, soul, and contradiction. The journey through the digital ego is not just an analysis of contemporary culture. It is a mirror that doesn't reflect faces, but absences. What we stopped feeling, what we stopped being in order to fit. We live in times where performance has replaced presence, where connection has been hollowed into clicks, where authenticity has become a market niche. But somewhere, even if blurred, even if faint, there is still a calling, a subterranean voice that keeps trying to remind us, you are not what you post. You are not what they say about you. You are not the character you created to survive the showcase of the world. This voice doesn't shout, it whispers and is almost always drowned out by the avalanche of stimuli, the silent comparisons, the unspoken fears. But it's there, in every moment you feel longing and don't know for what. In every time you look at your reflection and feel that something is missing. In every pause too uncomfortable to inhabit. That voice is what remains of your essence. The part that doesn't bend to algorithms, that doesn't need filters, that just wants to breathe fully, imperfectly, truly. To recognize the digital ego is not to deny it. It is to learn to see it for what it is, a construction, a response, to a time, a disguise, perhaps a necessary one, but not one that can take the place of the soul. We must make space for truth to reappear. And truth, when it arrives, is not aesthetic, it is raw, it is simple, it is quiet. It does not announce itself with 1,000 likes. It reveals itself in the moment you allow yourself to not know who you are and still keep searching. Because maybe the real reunion with yourself is not in discovering a new identity to show, but in unlearning everything you once had to fake, in stepping down from the stage, dismantling the set, turning off the lights, and finding, in the darkness, the warmth of your own presence, without script, without edits, without audience, just you, in the sacred space between deconstruction and rebirth.